hour. If you are joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. Please post your questions to the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community. And sometime after the session, we will have the link to the recording as well as the deck posted out on our website, automationhour.com. We'll also post on Salesforce Automation Hour and Twitter. And if you haven't signed up for our sessions that are booked through the end of July, I highly recommend that you do so. We have some MVPs who will be coming on and some community members who are passionate about automation. And if you have a business use case with a cool automation solution that you would like to share with the community, definitely DM us and we will get you on for one of the sessions that we will be booking for sometime this year. And we can't bring this free online webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io. So thank you so much. And here are your co-hosts, myself, David Litton, and Rakesh Gupta. This was from last year's Midwest Dreamin', and hopefully we'll be able to see you at some Dreamin' this year, maybe. But with that, let me have Rakesh come on and talk about virtual Dreamin'.
Hey guys, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are joining in this world. So we are me, Jitendraja, and Amit Chaudhary. We are going to organize world first sales at least in the Salesforce ecosystem. We are going to organize world first virtual dreaming. You can go to the website virtualdreaming.com. It is going to happen on 16th and 17th May. The idea behind is we are going to run this so from 16th May 9 a.m. EST to 17th May 8 a.m. EST, 24 hours. And we are going to have 3-track: admin, developers, and architect track. We have a couple of CTAs sign up to deliver the sessions. So if you're interested, just visit the website virtualdreaming.com, where you can see the option to submit call for papers or register for the event. And it's a free event, so you can join it from anywhere. And that's all from my side. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Rakesh. Okay. And without further ado, we're excited to have Jay Steadman on. He is from Salesforce, and he has a pretty cool solution that he's going to show for us today. So with that, let me hand it over to Jay. You should have control.
Okay, clicking show my screen. Wow, look at that guy. Can everyone see my bio slide?
It looks great.
Perfect. All right. Hello. This is a new thing, but I think it's kind of important to start off with this. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And what a crazy time that we're going through right now. So thanks for taking a little bit of time. I hope that everyone is safe and healthy and able to get the things that they need as we're all in varying levels of lockdown. I'm here in Indianapolis, and the city's pretty still and quiet. So I wish the best for you and your families. I hope that you're able to safely get those things that you need. And thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll be able to enjoy a little bit of automation and learn a little bit. I also want to let you know that because we've got this crazy outbreak going on, and because life is a little bit disrupted at the moment, you may hear a special guest in the background. And if you do, that special guest is my 10-week-old daughter, Ruby, who is currently napping. But she might not nap the entire time. If that happens, we might have a minor disruption as I go and get her and pick her back up, and we'll all deliver it together. She's a good co-host, and I look forward to that if it does happen. To tell you a little bit about who I am, I am a solution engineer. I work at Salesforce. I've been working in Salesforce technologies for about 8 years. I am an accidental admin kind of origin. I started as a receptionist at a company who happened to use Salesforce, and I fell in love with the technology. From there, I moved into being a Salesforce consultant. I was a product manager at one of our enterprise level customers, and then I became a success agent here at Salesforce, and then a solution engineer. So really, from orgs that have 36 licenses all the way up to orgs that have thousands and thousands of licenses, really my focus has been on declarative automation and also governance of Salesforce to make sure that you're actually building solutions that are sustainable and maintainable, that we've got a good combination of clicks and code wherever appropriate. I am 13 times certified, so I have the application architect and system architect credentials. And I'm also one of 4 Salesforce employees that's been awarded the Golden Hoodie. I got that last year based on some of my contributions. About a year and a half ago, I was ranked #1 in the Trailblazer community for contributions. I've been a presenter at Trailhead DX as well as Dreamforce this past year, and some Salesforce user groups here in the Indianapolis area. I also volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters as a big, which is really challenging right now. I think we might have to switch to virtual meetings for a little bit. And also the Salesforce Pathfinder program, where we reskill community college students and military veterans in Salesforce skills, either as admins or developers, so that they can go out into the community and pick up jobs that are in the Salesforce community. My favorite food is tonkatsu ramen. Went to Japan about 11 years ago, really fell in love with kind of the street food culture there. And anytime that I find ramen, I will eat the ramen, even if I've just eaten ramen. My Twitter is at @J__MDT because I am a custom metadata type. Please come over and say hello to me and let's have a conversation. Okay, yeah, that's all of me. Today's agenda, I think, is pretty straightforward, and I want to get into the solution and away from the slides as soon as I can. Basically, we're going to look at what we're trying to solve, why we may not have used some flow features that you've seen in release notes or even that may be available right now in the moment. Then we're going to look at how we did the specific solution, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use it. I'll pause throughout if I feel like there's an appropriate moment for questions. If you do have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll also have a questions session at the end if you've got any questions that we need to spend some time on. So at Salesforce, Salesforce employees are able to deploy applications to the community through something called Salesforce Labs. So Salesforce Labs are solutions that internally we think might be a good fit for the community. We develop them, we submit them to a kind of security screening process, and once they come out, you're free to go and download them and use them in your own orgs. It's a really nice little program because if we're connected to the community, we can hear about a need, and then we can try and extend our platform so that you're able to pick up that functionality very quickly. So I was talking with Amnon Kruvi, who's a fantastic member of the community, a London-based MVP and developer, and we have heard from a lot of people that there are some challenges around using business time in Salesforce. For example, I want to assign a task, but I don't want that task to land on a Saturday. I don't want that task to land on a holiday, right? So we identified that there was a gap here, that we could develop something and make it available for the community so that we could assign time to datetime fields and allow them to update without falling on a weekend, right? We only want things to fall within the hours that we're working. It makes it easier for our support agents or our sales reps to do their jobs. If we're thinking about distributing it to people, we wanted to make sure that the thing was very easy to update. We didn't want it to be difficult, and we wanted to make sure that it was 100% customizable, because we can't account for all use cases. The platform is too wide open. People are customizing it too deeply. So everything that we released, we wanted to make sure that there was no black box aspect of it, that you could see everything. And if you wanted to change any piece of it, you'd be able to change any piece of it. Now, there are some really neat things that are happening in Flow right now that I'm really excited about. Flow triggers, the fact that we can actually automatically generate variables and things of that nature. Those are features that are really awesome, and I look forward to diving into them in a little bit. The reason that we're not using those features is because this was released, I believe, Q3 of last year, and I've been on paternity leave, and this is Ruby. So I've been spending a lot of time with my daughter Ruby here. As I mentioned, she's 10 weeks old, and I'm so thankful that I have the opportunity to spend time with her on pat leave. So I'm really excited to look at the new flow features and see how we can update the package over time. But for the time being, we're going to look at it as it was developed and as it was released. So there's this question of how did we solve this issue, right? And to break it down into plain language, and then just generally the pieces of metadata in Salesforce that we used to solve the problem. First, we needed to identify a particular record either at creation or change. Then we needed to identify how much time we were trying to add to a field on that record. And then we needed to make sure that we were honoring the business hours that exist for our org, and that we were updating that record appropriately. Right. So in the right-hand column here, I've listed out the custom the metadata that we've used. So we've got process builder invoking flow. We've got flow that's referencing custom metadata types and information that it's ingesting from that process builder. And then we've also got a really nice invocable method that Amnon has written and generously donated and allowed me to use that within this package. So that's a really dry explanation. What I'd like to do actually now is get hands-on and get out of the slides. Okay, just double checking here. All right, we can see the org okay? Yeah, we can see the org. The very first thing that I want to point out, I'm now in a Salesforce instance. I went out, I spun up a new developer edition org, and I haven't done much to this developer edition org, and this is intentional. I want you to know that it's this easy to kind of get things up and running. So I went to the App Exchange, I went to Salesforce Labs, and I downloaded Business Time. That's the name of the Salesforce Labs flow solution. And then I tweaked the business hours here. So I'm on the business hours for our org, and you can have multiple business hours, of course. These are the default business hours that we'll be using, and it's a Monday through Friday business hour, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're not open on Sunday. We're not open on Saturday. And I also want to highlight here down at the bottom that we've got a holiday coming up on the 27th, and that is Dance Party USA. Right? So on the 27th, we know that everyone at our business is going to be doing a dance party, and it's really important that we don't want any tasks to fall to them either outside of business hours or on our holiday. So moving forward and looking at how business time works, right off the bat, business time is built to do one thing very, very well, and that is to make sure that tasks that are assigned to anyone in your org honor your business hours, and it is setting that time based on the priority of the task. Okay, so I'm going to generate 3 tasks based on the 3 default priorities that come with Salesforce out of the box, and we'll look at what due dates pop up. Now, in terms of the number of business days that we want to add, I just want to talk you through it first, and then we'll show it. First, if we have something that's a high priority task, we want it to be due the following business day. So today is Friday. We would expect that task to be due Monday. All right. If we have a normal priority task, we want that normal priority task to happen 7 business days from now. And if we have a low priority task, we want it to happen 14 business days from now. So I'm going to generate these 3 tasks, and I'm just going to name them by priority. So they're all going to be calls, and we'll call it call high. Now, you'll note that I don't put any due date in whatsoever, and I'm going to save the record here. And you can see that it has a due date of the 1st. Oh, sorry, that was priority normal. So it has a due date of the 1st. That's because it skipped a weekend, and it also skipped a holiday. I'm going to create a new task here, and I will go with the high one. Apologies, I'm getting that wrong. Call high priority. There we go. So you can see that the high priority call, the due date is the 23rd, and that gets us to Monday, right? Because today is the 20th, the 21st and the 22nd are weekend, 23rd, that brings us back to Monday. And I'm gonna create one more task. And we'll go with the low priority. And I'm going to save it here. And you'll see that the due date is the 10th. Now, in this case, what we're doing is we're actually skipping this weekend, then we're skipping our holiday on the 27th. Then we're skipping a second weekend. So 14 business days from today is the 10th of April. Want to pause here before I get into the guts of the process builder and the flow, see if we've got any questions.
We do not.
Okay, great, perfect. Cool. So we've seen how it works. Now let's dig into how that actually happens. I've opened up the process builder part of setup here, and you'll see that there is a process called task business time. You get this with business time, and when you click into it, you'll see what we've got going here. There is one little gotcha that I want to point out. It's really important for business time to function that at the end of the first node, evaluate the next criteria is selected. When I installed it into this org, I noticed that it was set to stop, and I had to change it to evaluate the next criteria. And I'm not sure whether or not that's something that happens when I package things up and it just changes all nodes to stop, or if I may have made a mistake in the packaging. So do ensure if you use business time that you change this to stop the process. You do that by cloning this, making a new version, changing it, saving it, and activating it. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 nodes on this process builder and see exactly what they're doing. First, I really try to make things simple for my end users. And the very first note here is saying, if the due date in a task is blank, just set the due date for today, right? And that's because we're overriding due dates regardless. And I don't want all of my actions or quick actions that I may generate as I'm working in my org to require people to enter a due date. Now, of course, as an administrator, I'm free to have that due date field. I can include it on page layouts. I could require it if I wanted to. But the way that business time is constructed, I've built it so that if you don't have a date in, by default, it sets that due date to today, and then we evaluate the next criteria. The next criteria simply says, is this a new record? If this is a new record, then go ahead and run the business time flow and feed that flow some information from the record, okay? And if you're new to flows, flows contain variables. They can ingest information and reference information from a variety of different sources. So in this case, Process Builder is remembering the values of 3 fields and passing those values over to a flow. And we'll look at that flow in a moment, but the 3 fields that are being passed over to the flow are the ID of the record, and this is required so that we're able to update the record, the priority of the record, and we need this so that we know how much time we're going to add to the record, and then the current due date, right? So the due date would either be the value that's contained up here, so today, or another value that somebody might have popped into the field, right? So we're passing the ID, the priority of the record, and that date value. We also have a note here that takes a look at whether or not the priority is changed. I find that to be an edge case, and if you don't think that people are going to be going in and changing priorities, it's very easy to clone this and delete that node. Again, every part of this is just as open to you as it is to me here. As I mentioned, I downloaded this directly from the App Exchange, right? So you can go ahead and remove any node that doesn't work for you or tweak any node that doesn't work for you. Any questions about the process builder before we move forward into the flow?
So there is a question.
Sure.
How does the process builder from the package influence other process builders on the same object task, i.e. if other process builder fires on specific due dates selected blank, or would you recommend refactoring, merging existing process builders with the package process builder?
That's a super great question. So in my opinion, I really think that the best way to go in terms of design patterns with Process Builder is to have a single master process builder. Whenever you're downloading a package, you want to take a look at how things are going to be interacting with existing automation or existing code that's in your org. So to preface all of this, the first thing that I would say is, since this is deployed as active in your org when you download it, of course you want to download this into a sandbox environment. You want to run some rigorous testing. If I were doing this, I would, in my own org, I would look at what's going on here in this process builder that comes with the package, and I would refactor it into my one existing process builder in my org. Now, there are some enterprise level orgs that may have more than one process builder on an object, but I find that that's only in really, really rare cases. I actually talk about this. I was on the admins podcast with Mike Gerhold, and almost our entire conversation was about this topic. So if you have the opportunity, I'm pretty sure you can Google my name and admins podcast or Mike Gerhold. I think that would pop up. Does that answer the question?
Yes, awesome. Thanks a lot.
Cool, great. We good to move forward?
Yep, that's it.
Perfect. So the next thing that I want to take a look at is the flow itself. So this is the flow that you get with Business Time. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm gonna, for those of you that are familiar with flow, great. I think this will be pretty straightforward. If you're newer to flow though, I wanna make sure that I spend a little bit of time and talk about it appropriately. Let's take some time and dive into these elements and explain what's going on here so that we're able to really get a thorough understanding regardless of our skill level. The very first thing that we do is we want to understand the amount of time that we need to calculate. So I'm cracking open this get records element, and this is going to do a lookup to something within my Salesforce org. Now, I mentioned that I'm a custom metadata type in my Twitter handle. I'm a big fan of custom metadata types. If you've never worked with metadata types, they're essentially a really great way for you to store information in your org so that it does not need to be hard-coded. And when I say hard-coded, it would be really easy for me to include the number of days that I want in the flow itself or in the process builder. So if a high priority task should wait 1 day, it would be easy for me to just say 1 day when priority equals high. But custom metadata types allows me to actually, as a record in Salesforce, I can actually store values, and then anything else that I generate can reference those values. So for example, I've got a custom metadata type record here that comes with Business Time that's open to you that's called high. High will wait 1 day. It will add 1 day. And in our hours, we have 8 hours per day. So the flow will be generating some math on your behalf based on these values. So if I wanted my high priority tasks to have a due date of 2 days instead of 1 day, the only thing I would have to do is edit this record and change number of days to 2 and click save. Now, there's a question of why did we do this? And the answer is it's super easy to maintain. If your comfort level or your skill level or your familiarity level with flow or automation is very low, the only thing that you need to tweak to use this out of the box is the number of days value. If you don't like 1, you could make it 2. If you don't like 2, you could make it 8. That's all you have to do. And the same thing is true for any of those other custom metadata type records. We've got a custom metadata type record for each of those priorities. We also have a custom metadata type record that's controlling just time values in general. And I'll show you that here in just a moment. Another thing that I really enjoy about custom metadata types, when we're building declarative automation, one of the things that is a big challenge is we have to be very careful about resource consumption. The number of times that we look up records, for example, that's something that we really need to tightly control. And then also we want to make sure if we're testing in a sandbox that it's easy for us to do that. When we use custom metadata types, I'm going to pop back to the flow for just a moment here. These lookup elements each count as a query, a SQL query in Salesforce. So if I were to make a custom object and were to set these values, there would be 2 major problems. The first would be every time that I tried to find the values that I'd set, I'd be consuming a SQL query. That is inefficient, and I want to avoid that if I can. The second challenge, I think, around that is if I were to spin up a new sandbox, those custom object records would not be there. So if I wanted to test this in a sandbox, I'd have to create those custom object records every single time. With custom metadata, I consume 0 SQL queries to find the values that I'm looking for, and those values will be automatically populated in my sandbox because they are metadata, not data. So that initial query, it's actually looking at our hours value. And it says that we have 8 hours per business day. and 60 minutes per business hour. Again, the flow is going to be doing math for us. So we get those records, we're looking for that business time record, and we record the minutes per hour and the hours per day. And we're going to record that into a variable for reference later on. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to assign the minutes and the hours that we pulled there. So we know that there are 60 minutes per hour, and we know that there are 8 hours per day. And we're putting those into variables again so that the flow can reference them. Now, eventually we're going to add time, but we're going to add that time not in hours or in days, but we have to add it in minutes, I believe. And so I've got some formulas here in the left-hand column. You'll see in the manager, I've got 2 formulas. One is business minutes and one is minutes per day. And if we look at those, again, you can edit these. Business minutes, they're minutes per day times the number of days that we'll be referencing. And we add 1 because we need to do that for the math to work if we're adding a day. And we also have minutes per day. And here you can see we've got the number of business hours times the number of business minutes. And that's how we come up with the number of business minutes that are in a day. I'm going to stop here before I get into any of our decisions. Does anyone have a question, comment, concern?
Here's one question. Are there other unmanaged packages available pre-built for other standard objects which would benefit from the same business hours logic?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is no. Business time currently, as it exists, is this is all that you get. I don't have another package that's for opportunities. But here's the cool thing, right? The intention behind this wasn't to create a package for every single object standard and then a bunch of objects that, eventually what I'd like to do is create a generic abstracted version that would function for any object. Flow's not there yet. So I include all of this and make all of it editable so that you could recreate this framework for any object that you want in your org, right? So good question. Does this exist for any other standard object? Answer, no. As we look at next year, there are a few tweaks that I want to make to this, and perhaps I'll include a couple of other standard objects as well. For example, cases seem like they'd be a pretty good object to work with.
Great, no more questions.
Cool. So we have looked at the minutes and the hours. We've got a formula working in the background. Now we've got a decision working here. Now remember, the process builder consumed the priority of our task. This decision element takes a look at the variable that process builder has passed to us, right? So every time that we see V priority, that stands for variable priority. And contained inside of that, because it's a container, we'll have a value of either high, normal, or low. And what we've done here is we've created 3 outcomes: high, normal, and low. And what we're saying is, if that variable is high, use the high outcome. If that variable is normal, use the normal outcome. If that variable is low, use the low outcome. And inside each one of these outcomes, we're doing another lookup to one of those custom metadata type records. So in this case, we're actually taking a look and trying to find the high value custom metadata type record, right? So when I come back to my custom metadata type records, I'm taking a look at that high record, and I'm taking a look at the number of days that I am supposed to add, right? So I'm taking a look at that number of days, and because those formulas on the back end are telling me the number of hours that are in my days and the number of minutes that are in hours, now I've got the number of minutes I'm supposed to be adding. Now, this is the same for each of the high, the normal, and the low. I'm looking at custom metadata to inform me what value I should hold on to, right? I'm holding on to that number of days value. If you were using this in your own org and you didn't use normal priority, it's as simple as deleting normal priority. I mean, technically, if you're not using it, you don't have to delete it, right? But if you deleted it, it wouldn't be there. It wouldn't confuse anyone later on. If in your org you have 5 priorities, you have low, normal, high, and very high, all you would have to do is create a new decision outcome here where variable priority equals very high, and then you would create another get record here, and you would look at a custom metadata type that you would create. So you'd go into the custom metadata types, you'd click manage records, you would create a new record, you would call this very high, and you would add your number of days, 0.5, or whatever you want it to be. And again, 100% of this is open, right? So if you want to tweak these metadata type records, you can. If you want to add a new one, you can. If you want to delete one, you can. If you ever back yourself into a corner where you've damaged the application in your sandbox and it's not functioning the way you'd like, you can always uninstall the package and then just download it again from the App Exchange. Any questions so far before we move into our invocable method, which is my favorite part?
Yes. So there's a question here. I'm still a little confused about when to use metadata types. Maybe that's outside the scope of this session, but any resources would be helpful. Kind of a broad question.
Yeah, it is a broad question, but I think it's an important question. If I were to give a simple answer to that question, it would be anytime that you are in a scenario where your business requirements may change frequently, and you reference those business requirements consistently throughout a variety of different pieces of automation in your org, such as validation rules, process builder, flow, custom metadata types are your friend, right? I'll give you an example. When I worked in the enterprise space, I once had to develop and maintain an application that ran credit checks. And it was flow-based. And I'm not even sure why this was the case at the time, because it could have been stored in variables, but they hard-coded a value of 14. It was 14 days. They hard-coded that value in like 12.5 different places. And they changed their business requirements every 3 or 4 months. And there was no documentation on this. It was something that I owned and had to maintain, and I had to update. It was incredibly difficult to find any of these changes. I could have simply had one custom metadata type record and stored that 14 value and changed it to 16, changed it to 18, and then all of my maintenance was done for me. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I don't know of any, I know that there have been some great Dreamforce sessions on custom metadata types. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter, either publicly or in a DM, and maybe we could work together to find specifically a custom metadata type resource, or I'm happy to chat with you further about it.
There is also, just to promote Trailhead, there's also a module on custom metadata types for admins. So I would recommend that you go there as well. It'll talk about how you reference it in formula fields and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen.
No problem. Back to you.
Yeah, so the idea really is, we're talking about the idea of abstraction, right? Whether we're talking about declarative automation or if we're talking about code, really, we never want to have to open the automation directly up and change a value. A way to explain that would be, I want to reference a resource here. I don't want to reference a direct value. It makes very poor sense to actually have hard-coded values in the work that I'm doing. The same thing would be true in validation rules, formula rules. Anytime that we can abstract and then point all of our automation or point all of our code to that single value that Salesforce can store in memory, we're going to have a far more performant automation, and it's going to be much easier to maintain. Okay. No other questions? Taking a quick look here. Cool, awesome. So let's talk about my favorite piece of this. So if y'all haven't worked with invocable methods before, they are fantastic chunks of Apex. And Apex is the proprietary business logic language of Salesforce. It's Java derived. Invocable methods are little chunks of code that you can use in your flows. They're reusable. They're really powerful because they're using the Apex engine, not the Flow engine. You can feed them variables. You can pull information out of them. And as I mentioned, Amnon Kruvy, the developer from London, MVP, fantastic fellow, a good collaborator and a good friend. he donated this invocable action. So what we do here is we take all of the math that we've done so far, which is how many minutes are in an hour, how many hours are in a day, how many days are we trying to add. Now, let's take a look at the Apex. So this is the developer console, and we've got about 41 lines of code that are written here. I don't want to overwhelm anyone with code. Frankly, Amnon's got some fantastic comments in here that are very simple and very easy to understand, fantastic for an admin. The great thing here is admins, you don't have to worry about maintaining any of this, but I want to show you what it is and kind of walk you through what it does so that you're aware of it. Again, none of this is a black box. And if you're working on teams with developers, or if you are able to work with this yourself, or you're interested in working with this yourself, it's open to you as well. There is nothing in this package that's a black box. So the very first thing that we do is make sure that it's bulkified, meaning if I had a bunch of users doing this simultaneously, making sure that they wouldn't screw each other's work up. From there, what we want to do is find which business hours in our org we're referencing. So as I pointed out in the very first screen that we took a look at, when I come to the business hours in my organization, I can actually have multiple business hours. So the fantastic thing about this invocable method is that if you take a look at it here in the flow canvas, I can actually pass the ID of a business hours into it. So if I have multiple business hours because I have a global organization or I have a few teams that use different hours, I could make versions of this for specific business hours. However, if no value is passed to the Apex, right? So we've got process builder that's passed things over to the flow, which looks over at custom metadata and now passes things over to Apex. If there is no ID, no problem. It is by default going to use the default org hours. So when you have business hours set, that one record of business hours, it is set as your default. You can tell by the checkbox on the right-hand side here. So if you don't pass an ID, no worries. The Apex says, great. If no hours were provided, go ahead and use the default org hours. And then it does a query to find those hours, right? Now, from there, once they're found, set those hours. So Apex is remembering those hours. Then it's taking the minutes value that we have passed to it and multiplying it by 60,000 to get the millisecond value. Because to do this, we actually have to calculate it all in milliseconds. Once that calculation is done, it passes it back to us. So we know how much time specifically to add to that value, to that date time value. So essentially, what this Apex action does, this invocable method does, is it says, great, how much total time are you giving me in minutes? Cool, I'm converting that into milliseconds. I'm finding which business hours I should be adding, and boom, here are how many minutes total you need to add. Questions?
Okay, there's one from Bruce. There's a new daylight saving setting in company setup. How does the package work with that?
That's a good question. When you say it's new, like new?
I don't remember what, it came out in a recent release. I
So
don't know how recent.
So to the best of my knowledge, this is just going to work with your business hours, whether or not they're on daylight savings. If you've changed over to daylight savings, it should be updating in whatever your time zone is. As you can see here, you also get to choose time zone. So I haven't heard of any conflict with daylight savings. We have people that are out there using it in the wild right now, and there's no conflict that I'm aware of.
Okay. How can you tell if the code is bulkified?
Yeah, super good question. And unfortunately, I don't think that we've got a lot of time to discuss that today. Also, I want to make sure that I'm not missing any of the nuance in that. In this invocable method, the way that we can see that it's bulkified is because we're processing lists. Basically, what Amnon has done is created a scenario in which you and me and Jen and Rakesh and David could all be using Salesforce at the same time, could all be invoking this method simultaneously, and that method is then collecting all of our requests in a single list. That's part of bulkification. I think, again, there are lots of resources on bulkification that we could take a look at. I think, Jen, correct me on this because you're the Trailhead master. I think that there's also part of the Apex trails cover how to bulkify code.
I would think so.
Yeah, I think so as well. Again, hit me up on Twitter and we can kind of dive into that a little bit more specifically if you find it helpful.
Okay. And another question is, why milliseconds? Who would know that?
So the good question. The answer is computers. Computers would know that, right? So we're actually calling to a date time field, right? This whole thing functions on date time fields, and it's all math. And the way to add values to date time fields is through milliseconds. Certainly, you and I wouldn't know that at all. This has actually been a challenge for a long time, is how can I calculate date time values very, very simply in Salesforce? For me, the biggest value in this whole package, it's not any of the declarative stuff that's been put together. It's this little Apex action that you can call whenever you need to, right? Which says, give me a certain number of minutes, I'll spit all of the information back to you that you need. That to me is really the big value.
No more questions.
Cool. So the Apex action actually spits back the returned date time. And we're taking that output and we're putting it in a variable. So we've got the returned date time, and then we are assigning, I've got a record collection variable here, which basically contains the values of a task. And I've got the ID. So that's the task ID that the process builder has passed over to me. And I've got the returned date time that I got from my invocable Apex, my invocable method. So we did all of that work so that I've got the ID of the task and I know the date time that I want to be populated in the field. And then my final item is to actually update that task, right? So boom, here we are. I'm updating my task. I set those variables so my updated my update record element, it's got everything that it needs. I just have to create it and point it at the right variable. So just to walk you through this at a very high level again, the very first thing that we do is to have business hours in our org. A process builder, when a task is created, will look to see whether or not we have a date time value assigned. If not, we'll give it a value of today. If it's a new record, we invoke our flow. If the priority is changed, we invoke our flow. Our flow says, hey, give me how many hours there are in a day, how many minutes are in an hour, then assign this to some variables. Take a look at the priority that was given to me by my process builder. Then depending on that value, look up the appropriate custom metadata type record and add that in terms of time. So if it's high priority, I want you to add 1 day, and a day consists of 8 hours and an hour consists of 60 minutes. If it's normal, normal is 7 days. There are 8 hours in a day and there are 60 minutes in an hour. Low is 14 days. And again, it's pulling that from our custom metadata type records. Then the Apex action basically says, yo, find me which business hours I'm referencing. Awesome. Take all of that math that the flow has generated and turn it into milliseconds, because human beings find that hard to understand, and add that to the date time value and return that to the flow. We then assign that to a record collection variable, and then we say, cool, it's a record variable, I suppose, not a record collection variable, and then cool, we update the record. And all of that allows us to come into a task, create a new task, set that task as call hi, save, and boom, 323. Just to show you how easy it is to maintain this or to change things, I've never actually done this before, so if there is a part of this presentation that's going to go wrong, it's here. So I've changed the value of number of days on high from 1 to 2. So here, I should expect this value to go from 323 to 324. Guys, part of my job is doing presentations all the time, and what I'm doing right now is never recommended. I'm very nervous. Boom, 324, right? It's that simple. I think that wraps it for me. Jen, David, Rakesh, any questions from y'all or any questions from the group at large?
So we'll give folks a couple more minutes to see if they have any last minute questions. Oh, we got one question now. Not related to this flow, I have a simple process builder where a certain actions are executed when a record is created. Is new after the record is created. I want to check if one of the fields is blank, run a flow, pause for a minute for the record to be saved. This step is triggered. I see the process in pause flow interviews. However, the flow exists without populating the field with a correct value. Could you please advise what I might be missing?
I suppose the question I would have specifically in this case is, do you ever see that paused flow interview leave the queue?
Yes.
Interesting. I would check your update. If I'm being totally honest with you, I've built a lot of process builders and flows, and typically 9.8 times out of 10, when I'm not getting the results that I'm expecting, it's because I missed something that should have been in there. Which isn't to say you're doing the same thing, but it certainly is to say that that's what happens with me. I would really check to make sure that your flow update is running appropriately. It could be that you don't have the ID being fed to the flow. So it's trying to make an update, but it doesn't know where to update. It could be that you think that you've saved either a variable or a value in the flow as an update, but perhaps it didn't complete the field in the flow. I don't mean, sometimes when I'm creating a flow, I'm not sure whether or not they fixed this bug, but as I was populating variables and values, sometimes what I typed in the flow builder, it wouldn't save. So I would just double check everything that you've done with a fine tooth comb. And in fact, have somebody that you trust look over your shoulder as you're doing it, because you tend to be more rigorous about your own work as you're explaining something to someone else. That might give you the thing that you're missing.
Yeah, I think if you continue to have the problem, it's something that you can go out to the Trailblazer community, either Salesforce Automation Hour or one of the other automation Trailblazer communities, to post images of your setup, because
Yeah.
by looking at it, would be able to help you troubleshoot better.
Yeah, images of the flow, images of the process builder. If you get an error log, actually sharing the full body of the email, if you've got an error, running debug mode, all of those things could be really, really helpful.
All right, what other Automation Hour webinars are planned? I recommend that you go to our website, automationhour.com. And all our upcoming sessions are listed there, as well as the links to the registration. Next question, what if a holiday falls on a weekend, say July 4th on Saturday? Would it know to mark Friday as an observed holiday?
So good question. The way that business hours are going to work here, if there's a day that you think people should have off, right, you would have to enter it as your holiday, right? So if your company observes a holiday, you need to actually put that date in as the holiday, right? So if I were to do that, I would say I'd create a new holiday. At least this is we should verify this, but I'm pretty sure that this is the case. I don't think that Salesforce has the knowledge baked in. Certainly business time, the package doesn't have it baked in, but I would say 4th of July observed. This is if the 4th of July happened today, for example. And I would save, right? That way, it's one of the holidays that Salesforce will take into account. If I don't do that, Salesforce isn't going to know that something that's on a Saturday should also be considered off on a Friday.
Right. The next question, how much more often do you use Process Builder instead of Flow? Is Flow expected to eventually tire from Salesforce functionality in favor of Process Builder? It's actually going to be the other way around.
Yeah, Jen
Flow's
hit it
going
on
to
the
be the
head.
winner.
So there have been some massive improvements. I've always been a fan of Flow. But in terms of its usability and its ease of use, it has, and also its power, what it's able to do, there have been some massive changes that have come in the last several releases. And you can see, if you look release to release to release to release, the power in the Flow engine is really getting huge. I would expect that Process Builder and Flow will coexist in the same way that right now we have workflow rules that are still exist. We haven't retired workflow rules at Salesforce. And keep in mind, I'm not speaking as I'm not representing Salesforce in this conversation, but as a person, I don't see Process Builder being retired. That being said, as a developer, now that we've got Flow triggers, I will use Process Builder less and I will be using Flow more when a use case allows me to use Flow.
Yeah, so the thought process from the Salesforce product managers who focus on automation is that you shouldn't have to have several different automation tools. You should just have the one. So therefore, as you're looking at the releases, you will see, as Jay mentioned, a lot more focus on flow enhancements going forward. And they're really taking a look at the UI and making it as easy as possible, because they do recognize that there is a huge learning curve going from Process Builder to Flow. So they're doing things like in the last release, you're now able to create variable or have Salesforce create the variables for you. You don't have to do it for yourself, for example.
Yeah, that's such a. I'm glad that you brought that up, Jen. It's like that change is so massive. I'm sure that you found the same thing to be true on Automation Hour, but here in Indianapolis, I often I've had to give presentations just on variable construction, variable naming conventions, because for admins, it was a big jump to go from being able to do things very easily just by putting values in to suddenly this idea of containing values inside of something else. So, the fact that Flow can now create our variables for us, that's super powerful. One day soon, I'd love to see generic object handling so that we don't have to specify per object. I've heard talk that, someday on the horizon, something like that would be powerful. And certainly that would make my life so much easier.
Yeah, with the last release, they introduced generic objects, and those would be with actions
Oh my
for now.
gosh.
Yeah,
See, this is what
yeah.
I'm
So
so happy to spend this time with Ruby, but I'm glad that you told me that, because that's a significant game changer.
yeah, so there was a lightning lounge that Alex Edelson did a couple of days ago, and he talked
Yeah.
about there's a lot of resources, everyone, on unofficialsf.com if
Yeah.
you haven't gone there. But there is, they've put out a bunch of actions. You can do map action, you can specify the object and then specify what you want to set, like a rating field to something, and it will do it for you instead of putting things in loops and collection variables and
Yeah.
things like that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of cool things out there. If you haven't heard of it, again, unofficialsf.com. But let me, there are a couple of more questions that I want to make sure we get through. So Josh asks, what if I already have a process builder that is populating a date field based on a sub status change? On a particular sub status, the date is today. I would like it instead to be the following day if it is after business hours. Is it possible with this?
Yeah, so I would crack open a sandbox, and this sounds like a good use case for playing around with and extending and customizing business time a little bit. In your case, I think that you would want to predominantly take a look at the flow and the invocable action. You might not want to use the process builder that I include, but you could, in the node of the process builder that you're talking about, you could have you could invoke the flow and then trust the invocable method inside the flow to give you the date time that you're looking for.
Another question, not entirely related to this particular session. Flows seem to me that you need to have some coding background to know what variables, elements, et al. Mean. I have a use case where I need to auto-create renewal opportunities along with the line items. Can this be done via Process Builder? I had found this, oh, it's on Rakesh's
Yeah, it is.
blog. It has helped me get to some point, but I'm now stuck as it created a few years back, and Flow has long developed. Any help or guidance is highly appreciated.
So I'm going to break this into a couple of different pieces. I'll answer the kind of comment or question around having a developer background to understand Flow first, and then we'll talk about the use case second. So I am a formerly homeless bass guitar player from Los Angeles, and I can assure you that they did not cover Java in any of that experience. By which I mean to say, there is literally nothing special about me that makes this stuff easier to understand. It takes a little bit of time, and some of it can be a little bit challenging, but I'm super bad at math, and I make mistakes all the time, and I've developed scalable enterprise-grade declarative automation tools, and like it's possible, right? One of the things that the product group has done at Salesforce is they've made it easier and easier to use. One of the things that I do as an evangelist is to say, you can do this. Don't let it intimidate you, because honestly, when we start to convince ourselves that we need a certain kind of background to do the work, we miss the point. This tool democratizes technology, right? Now, it is harder to understand than Process Builder. That is a fact. But in tackling it, in doing the work, in challenging yourself, you're going to find that you can understand it and you will understand it. And you should rely on those of us in the community. We are all I'm happy to talk with you, right? I'm sure that Jen and others are happy to talk with you. The community user groups are amazing, right? Ask the questions, get the answers, and move forward there. To your specific use case, Rakesh can probably speak about the post and whether or not it's outdated. I'm confident that you can do what you're trying to do in Flow, but if he's got a post about doing it yeah, Rakesh?
Is he on mute?
He might be.
If he's not able to respond, I would recommend that you go on the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community and post and mention him. He's constantly out there, so I'm sure he would gladly jump in to answer something about his blog post. And I agree with Jay. Like, I learned Flow. I have a marketing and finance background. I don't have a technology background at all. And I learned Flow from people like Rakesh, who did blog posts, people like Brian Kwong.
He's great.
There's so many people who have posted blog posts. David Litton now, myself. Just take one of the blog posts or use case that you can relate to and go through step by step. And keep at it, and eventually it will resonate with you.
Yeah,
I'd say, really just keep at it.
I
And
think
start simple too. Don't go for the highly complex. Just do a little thing like click a button in a flow that then changes a field. Start like that, right? And then build from there.
Yeah, there's the phrase, you have to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? If you're tasked with eating an elephant and you look at it, that's a really overwhelming scenario. But realize that we all have to, it's one bite at a time. That's how we get to the point where we're actually able to do it. The same thing is true with building on these things. You start with a simpler use case and you try and build from there. Of course, in the case that Atakul is bringing up here in the comments, it might be challenging because it could be a work requirement. There could be a deadline on it. But again, it seems to be tied to an existing blog post, and I'm sure that Rakesh can advise on it since it's based on something that's already published and out there. the last thing that I want to say near the end here is, Jen, you brought up unofficial SF. I've actually worked with Alex a little bit, and we had conversations that came out of Trailhead DX last year. And I've actually got a post on unofficial SF that kind of speaks to the combining things like Flow and Process Builder with invocable methods. It's really helpful if any of you in the audience today are trying to convince some of your developers that it can be a best of both worlds environment where they're writing a little bit of code and you're doing a little bit of declarative automation. I definitely recommend checking that out if you have the opportunity.
And one last thing note, by working on flows, and if you want to learn Apex, it makes it easier
It
because
really does.
you're using the same concepts. All right, we're at time. This was an awesome session. A lot of great questions. Thank you for all of that. And Jay, come back
Yeah.
and present something else.
Sure, I'd love to. I'd love to. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, I just want to say, stay safe. I hope everyone is well. Turn to social media or a phone call or a FaceTime to people that you love if you're in a super stressed out situation right now, and let people know if you can't get the things that you need.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. And please go out and register for future Automation Hour sessions at automationhour.com. And we'll talk to you next time. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.